May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, I was talking about letters in the children's message, and well, every now and then, and I imagine you too, every now and then I get a formal invitation in the mail. It happens rarely, so I'm generally surprised when I'm going through the junk mail and the bills to find one. Now, the invitation's usually printed on a cardstock or thick paper. That's pretty standard, right? Now, that's kind of what we think of when we think of an invitation, a formal invitation anyway. There are all kinds of other ways I learned when I was preparing for this sermon. I looked online to find kind of other ways that people do invitations. There are a lot of creative ways out there, actually. Sometimes people use balloons. They have things written on balloons or things written on handkerchiefs, or they use snow globes. Have you ever thought of a snow globe for an invitation? I never would have thought of that. Or they'll have fortunes, or they use viewfinders. There are all kinds of ways. Now, invitations are usually like this, or to something special, aren't they? It could be a wedding, a graduation, a milestone birthday, or an anniversary, a major anniversary. Well, these types of invitations have two things in common, I think. They invite us to be with others, right? And also they invite us to party. Yeah. Or as some people might say today, to live large, to live your best life. Well, in today's gospel, we see an invitation, actually. You might not think of that. But in today's gospel, what we see is that Jesus invites you to live abundantly, to live your best life. Now, people say when they hear the gospel text that we heard today, people sometimes today especially think that Jesus is referring to what we celebrate here now, the Eucharist. After all, he says, I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats of this bread will live forever. And the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. Now, we think to ourselves, well, we're not talking literally about eating someone's flesh. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the Eucharist, right? Well, I think that's true to a certain extent. But I think it's a little different than what we normally think of, our normal understanding and interpretations of the Eucharist. Now, there are various beliefs about the significance of the Eucharist. Now, at one end, some people believe that the bread and the wine, that's what they are. They're nothing more than bread and wine. And this meal, they say, well, it's a reminder of Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. Now, in those traditions, people will have communion once every 3 months or so, once a quarter. Now, at the opposite end, what you see is people who believe that the Eucharist is Jesus' body and blood. Now, the Episcopal Church, we kind of fall in the middle. We say it is bread and wine, but we say Jesus is spiritually present, that he is here. Now, the biblical scholar Caroline Lewis says that in John's gospel, the Eucharist really doesn't refer to these understandings. In John's gospel, it really is an invitation to life with God, an invitation to true life, an invitation to abundant life, the kind of life that we can only have with God, regardless of whatever might be going on in our lives. Now, today's passage is part of what's called the Bread of Life discourse. Now, the word life or living appears 8 times. You might not have noticed that, but when you take your bulletin home, you can count them. It appears in one way or another 8 times in that very, very short passage, life, living, whatever. Now, according to the biblical scholar Raymond Brown, that word life appears 36 times in John's gospel. It appears so much, way more than in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, where it only appears 16 times. It appears so much more that sometimes people call John's gospel the gospel of life. Now, in John's gospel, Jesus explicitly tells us that he comes that we may have abundant life. In chapter 10, he says, Very truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who come before me are thieves and bandits. The thief comes only to steal, to kill, destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. Now, I think our culture makes it difficult to understand what Jesus says, what Jesus means when he says, have life and have it abundantly. And I think that's because of what our culture's standards and norms and images are of abundant life. Now, in 2018, Cindy and I went to Jamaica for a vacation. Now, I posted pictures and stuff on Facebook. And so a Facebook friend, commented on one of my posts that I was, quote, living my best life, end quote. Now, I'd never heard the phrase best life. Now, I only learned later that because, I don't really keep up a whole lot with popular music. I only learned later that that phrase became very popular around that time because of some hit songs. Well, when I read my friend's comment, I wondered, is this really my best life? Now, don't get me wrong. I love my vacation. I mean, I did things that I had never done before, like I went zip lining. That was really cool, by the way. Zip lined over a waterfall. It was neat. I also went cliff jumping. Oh, boy. I don't know that I'm planning on cliff jumping during my retirement, but it was fun. I did it, So, I had a great time. But still, was that my best life? I don't know. Now, of course, that is what our culture thinks, right? Vacations in exotic locations, lots of money, big houses, flashy cars, elegant clothes, fine food, a ripped or beautiful body, in the company of gorgeous people. That's what equals our best life. That's what equals living large, living the good life, or whatever other expression you want to use for it. Now, those luxuries are nice. Yeah, certainly they are. But they are unnecessary for the abundant life. The abundant life that Jesus comes to give us and offers us is something much richer, much fuller, actually. In John's gospel, life means relationship with God. It means dynamic living with God. And in John's gospel, death means separation from God. So Jesus gives his life so that we might live, so that we might be reunited with God, so that we might finally truly live. On the cross, he overcomes the power of sin. He overcomes everything that divides us from God so that we can once again live with God. When we enter a relationship with God through Jesus Christ, as it says in John, we are born again, born from above, and we truly begin to live. Excuse me. At St. Michael's Raleigh, where I served before coming to grace, there was a woman named Catherine. She suffered from multiple sclerosis, and she passed away, I learned, this summer. Catherine lived for many years, actually the entire time that I knew her when I was there, and she was there after I left St. Michael's. She lived in this drab rehab center on Wade Avenue. I mean, it's the last place in the world anyone would want to live, believe me. She was confined in a wheelchair. She was confined in a wheelchair for years. But despite her degenerative illness, the limitations, the poor living conditions, Catherine lived more abundantly than almost anyone I have ever met in my life. She was a woman of amazing faith. Catherine regularly attended the midweek Bible study, Eucharist, and lunch at St. Michael's. She had incredible spirit, spunk, joy. She lived life fully. She went to the symphony. She went on trips. Catherine had a devoted circle of friends. They came to visit her all the time. They played Scrabble with her. She almost always trounced them, too. She was a very bright woman. Catherine had an active correspondence as well. She sent out Christmas letters in December and in June. When she could no longer write, she dictated them. Her friends mailed them for her, and then they read to her the responses, the cards that came in. Now, we need to be clear. Catherine never pretended to like her condition. No. She would occasionally swear. She could be salty and complain bitterly about it from time to time. But there was always a certain spirit about her, a certain joy, which is why she had, I think, so many devoted friends. Despite all appearances otherwise, despite what our society would say, Catherine, she lived large. She lived abundantly. Her faith, her spirit enabled her to live abundantly. Regardless of your circumstances in life, regardless of whatever your abilities or disabilities might be, each Sunday that we gather together in church, the Eucharist invites you to live with God. The one who died and rose again, that's the one who sits at the head of this table. Jesus is, in a way that goes beyond our understanding, he is somehow in the bread and the wine. We eat his flesh and drink his blood when we chew that piece of bread and when we sip that little bit of wine. The risen Christ becomes a part of us, and we a part of him. This simple meal, this reminder of Jesus' death and resurrection, invites you to a new way of life, a different way of life from the one our society offers you, to an abundant way of life that is the life with God, to the fullest life imaginable. Each Sunday, this Eucharistic feast invites you to life with, in, and through Jesus Christ, invites you to your best life.